The void of space is silent until it isn't. Picture this, a crew of astronauts floating hundreds of miles above Earth, their mission routine until a sudden shudder rocks their spacecraft. Alarms blare, lights flicker, and in that moment the cold truth hits: space doesn't forgive mistakes. This isn't science fiction. It's the reality of exploration beyond our atmosphere, where dangers lurk in every shadow, unseen and often unspoken. We marvel at the beauty of distant galaxies and the triumph of human ingenuity, but behind every success story, there are risks so extreme they'd keep you awake at night. Think space is just a vast, empty playground. Think again. From radiation storms that fry electronics and human DNA to micrometeoroids moving faster than bullets, the cosmos is a battlefield. Even the simplest oversight, a tiny crack in a spacesuit, a miscalculation in oxygen levels, can turn a mission into a tragedy in seconds. And these aren't just hypothetical nightmares. History is littered with close calls, near misses, and heartbreaking losses that remind us space exploration is as perilous as it is awe-inspiring. But here's what no one tells you: the real dangers aren't always the ones you'd expect. Sure, we've all heard about black holes and solar flares, but what about the psychological toll of isolation millions of miles from home? Or the bizarre ways zero gravity can warp the human body over time? In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on the 30 most terrifying, unexpected, and downright strange hazards of space travel, risks so extreme they'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about venturing beyond Earth. Strap in, this journey isn't for the faint of heart. Cosmic radiation doesn't announce itself with flashing lights or blaring alarms. It's invisible, silent, and utterly relentless. Unlike Earth, where our atmosphere and magnetic field act as a protective shield, space offers no such safety net. Out there, high-energy particles from distant supernovas and our own sun tear through spacecraft walls like they're made of tissue paper. These aren't your average X-rays. We're talking about atomic fragments moving at nearly the speed of light, capable of shredding DNA strands with each pass through an astronaut's body. The toll, over time, even short missions can lead to cellular mutations that ramp up cancer risks or trigger degenerative diseases. NASA studies show astronauts exposed to deep space radiation develop cataracts prematurely, while others face compromised immune systems as if their bodies are aging at warp speed. And here's the chilling part: current shielding technology is like bringing a raincoat to a hurricane. Metals like aluminum, often used in spacecraft hulls, can actually make things worse by splintering radiation into secondary particles, creating a deadly shower inside the cabin. Scientists are racing to tackle this with innovations like water-filled barriers or magnetic force fields, but the solutions are years away from being mission-ready. Meanwhile, every astronaut who ventures beyond low Earth orbit rolls the dice with their long-term health. Imagine knowing each day in space is etching irreversible damage into your cells. That's the grim reality of cosmic radiation. And as we aim for Mars, where a round trip could expose crews to radiation levels 60 times higher than on Earth, this invisible killer might be the toughest obstacle we've ever faced. Floating weightlessly might look like fun, but the human body wasn't built for life without gravity, and the price of defying our biology is steep. After just 2 weeks in microgravity, astronauts lose bone density at a rate 10 times faster than osteoporosis patients on Earth. The longer they stay, the more their skeletons weaken, with some returning from 6-month missions having aged their bones by decades. Calcium leaches into their bloodstream, muscles waste away from disuse, and even the spine stretches, adding inches to their height temporarily. The real danger isn't the changes themselves, but how stubbornly the body resists recovery. On Earth, rehab can take twice as long as the mission lasted, with astronauts struggling to walk or stand without support for weeks. NASA studies reveal some never fully regain lost bone mass, leaving them vulnerable to fractures for life. And it's not just the bones. Without gravity's constant pull, the heart grows lazy, shrinking in size and struggling to pump blood efficiently. Vision blurs as fluid pools in the skull, pressing on optic nerves in a condition nicknamed spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. Countermeasures like resistance workouts and specialized diets help, but they're a band-aid on a bullet wound. The International Space Station's exercise machines, for instance, can't fully simulate Earth's load, leaving muscles understimulated. Scientists are experimenting with artificial gravity centrifuges and drug therapies, but for now, every astronaut is a lab rat in humanity's grand experiment, sacrificing their health to prove we can survive where evolution never intended us to go. The paradox is cruel. To reach the stars, we must first let our bodies wither. And as missions stretch toward Mars, where round-trip voyages could last years, the question isn't just whether we can survive the journey, but whether we'll be too broken to enjoy the destination. The silence of space isn't just an absence of sound, it's an absence of life, of connection, of everything familiar. Astronauts train for years to handle the technical demands of spaceflight, but no simulation can prepare them for the crushing weight of psychological isolation. Imagine being trapped inside a metal canister millions of miles from Earth with the same handful of faces for months on end. The novelty of floating wears off fast when you realize there's no escape, no fresh air, no new scenery, not even a change in the weather. History gives us chilling glimpses of what this does to the human mind. Take the Skylab 4 mission, where 3 astronauts stretched to their limits by an unrelenting workload finally snapped. They stopped responding to mission control, ignored procedures, and essentially staged a mutiny in orbit. It wasn't rebellion for the sake of it, it was a survival instinct kicking in. Their brains, starved of rest and variety, simply refused to cooperate any longer. NASA later called it the first and only space strike, a warning etched into the history books. But it's not just workload that breaks people. The monotony itself is a slow poison. Without the daily rhythms of Earth sunrises, seasons, even the simple act of stepping outside time blurs into a featureless void. Sleep becomes erratic as the body struggles without natural light cues. Depression creeps in, with some astronauts reporting waves of existential dread when they glance out the window and see nothing but infinite blackness. Others describe a bizarre phenomenon called the overview effect, where the sheer scale of space makes human problems feel trivial, and for some, that realization is more isolating than comforting. Then there's the friction between crewmates. In confined spaces, petty annoyances fester. A misheard comment, a forgotten chore, even the way someone breathes can spiral into resentment. Studies in Antarctic research stations, Earth's closest analog to space isolation, showed teams splitting into factions, with some members withdrawing entirely. In space, there's no walking away to cool off, no privacy to regroup. Every argument happens in a fishbowl, with mission control sometimes listening in. Countermeasures exist, but they're imperfect. Video calls with family help, but the lag in deep space will make real-time conversation impossible. Virtual reality, escapes to Earth-like settings are in testing, but they're no substitute for real sensory input. The truth is, we're social creatures wired for connection, and space is the ultimate solitary confinement. As missions stretch toward Mars, where communication delays with Earth could span 40 minutes, astronauts won't just be physically alone, they'll be psychologically marooned. The real question isn't whether humans can survive the journey, but whether our minds can endure the silence. Out there in the blackness of space, you won't find just stars and planets, you'll find a junkyard. Millions of man-made fragments, from dead satellites to flecks of paint, whiz around Earth at speeds topping 17,000 miles per hour. At those velocities, even a screw becomes a deadly projectile. A single collision with debris the size of a marble could unleash the energy of a hand grenade, punching through spacecraft hulls like they're made of paper. The numbers are staggering. Over 29,000 objects larger than a softball are tracked in orbit right now, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Estimates suggest there are over 100 million smaller pieces, nuts, bolts, frozen coolant droplets, each capable of catastrophic damage. The worst part. This isn't some static cloud, it's a cascading threat. When two objects collide, they don't just stop, they shatter, creating even more debris in a nightmarish chain reaction known as the Kessler syndrome. We've already seen close calls that could have rewritten history. In 2009, a defunct Russian satellite slammed into an active American communications satellite, instantly adding 2,000 new fragments to the orbital graveyard. The International Space Station regularly dodges debris, sometimes with only hours' notice, and in 2021, a tiny piece of space junk punched a hole in the station's robotic arm, a chilling reminder that no spacecraft is invincible. The danger isn't just to astronauts. Every wrecked satellite, every shredded solar panel makes future space travel riskier. Imagine a future where low Earth orbit is so clogged with debris that launch windows vanish, trapping us on our own planet. That's not science fiction, it's the path we're on if we don't act. Scientists are scrambling for solutions, from robotic garbage collectors to nets that could drag debris back into the atmosphere to burn up. But for now, every new satellite we launch adds another ticking time bomb to the mix. Space was once the final frontier. Now it's becoming a minefield of our own making, one where the shrapnel moves faster than bullets and shows no mercy. The sun isn't just the source of life, it's also one of space's most unpredictable killers. Solar flares erupt without warning, violent explosions on the sun's surface that blast radiation across the solar system at nearly the speed of light. These aren't just dazzling light shows, they're waves of energy so powerful they can cripple satellites, knock out power grids on Earth, and turn a spacecraft into a death trap for anyone inside. What makes solar flares so terrifying is the speed at which they strike. Unlike cosmic radiation, which is a constant background threat, a flare's X-rays and charged particles can reach Earth's orbit in just 8 minutes. That's less time than it takes to brew a cup of coffee, and astronauts might have even less warning to react. Imagine working outside your spacecraft when an alarm blares, a storm is coming, and you have mere seconds to reach shelter. Miss that window, and the radiation dose could exceed a lifetime's safe limit in hours. History offers grim proof of the danger. During the Apollo era, NASA narrowly avoided disaster when a massive flare erupted in August 1972, right between the Apollo 16 and 17 missions. Had astronauts been on the moon at the time, they'd have faced radiation levels 500 times higher than Earth's annual safe exposure. Even inside their spacecraft, shielding might not have been enough. Fast forward to today, and the risk hasn't lessened. In 2017, a surprise solar storm forced astronauts on the International Space Station to huddle in the most shielded section for days, their instruments flickering with static as particles bombarded the station. The real nightmare scenario, a flare hitting during a spacewalk. Outside the relative safety of a ship's hull, an astronaut suit offers little protection. Radiation would penetrate their body like invisible bullets, damaging organs and scrambling DNA. There's no pain, no immediate burn, just silent, irreversible harm. Scientists monitor the sun around the clock, but predictions are far from perfect. A flare can build and erupt in minutes, leaving crews with nothing but hope and hastily improvised barriers like stacking food containers or water bags around them as makeshift shields. And here's the cruel irony: the farther we venture from Earth, the deadlier these storms become. A trip to Mars means months outside our planet's protective magnetic field, exposed to whatever the sun hurls our way. Future bases on the Moon or Mars will need underground bunkers lined with thick layers of regolith because when the next big flare comes, survival won't be about technology. It'll be about who can dive into cover fastest. The sun gives life, but in space it can also take it away in the blink of an eye. Vacuum exposure isn't just a danger, it's one of the most horrifying ways space can kill you. Picture this, a tiny rip in your spacesuit, no bigger than a pinprick. At first, nothing seems wrong. Then, in less time than it takes to blink, the universe sucks the air from your lungs with the force of an industrial vacuum. Your body swells as fluids boil at room temperature, your saliva vaporizes, and your eardrums rupture from the pressure difference. Consciousness fades in under 15 seconds, not from pain. There isn't time to feel it, but from oxygen starvation as your blood turns to foam. History gives us chilling glimpses of what this looks like. In 1971, Soviet cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Viktor Patsayev, and Vladislav Volkov died during re-entry when a faulty valve cracked open their Soyuz capsule. The cabin depressurized instantly, and by the time they landed, their bodies bore the brutal marks of vacuum exposure, swollen tongues, ruptured capillaries, and blood pooling where gravity no longer held it in place. They'd been trained professionals, but in the face of a hull breach, training means nothing. Even a small leak can be catastrophic. In 1965, NASA astronaut Gene Cernan's suit nearly overheated and ballooned during a spacewalk when his life support system malfunctioned. His visor fogged with his own exhaled moisture, and his gloves inflated like balloons, leaving him barely able to grip tools. He survived, but only because the flaw was caught before full decompression occurred. Modern suits have redundancies, but no design is perfect. A micrometeoroid strike, a snapped tether, or a single faulty seal can turn a routine mission into a death sentence. The physics behind vacuum exposure is merciless. Without atmospheric pressure, water in your skin and eyes boils at body temperature, though the heat isn't what kills you. Your lungs collapse as gases expand violently, tearing alveoli like overfilled balloons. If you foolishly hold your breath, a natural reflex, the pressure difference can rupture them entirely, flooding your chest with air bubbles. NASA animal tests in the 1960s showed dogs exposed to near vacuum survived if repressurized within 90 seconds, but beyond that, brain damage was irreversible. Spacesuits are miracles of engineering, yet they're still fragile. Layers of Kevlar and Mylar can't guarantee safety when a stray bolt or shard of orbital debris moves faster than a sniper's bullet. Even inside a spacecraft, hull breaches are a constant threat. The International Space Station has contingency plans for rapid sheltering, but on a moon base or Mars mission, help could be hours or lifetimes away. Hollywood gets it wrong. There's no dramatic flailing or slow-motion agony. Vacuum kills quietly and efficiently, leaving no room for heroics. One moment you're there, the next you're a frozen, bloated corpse drifting silently through the void. It's a reminder that space isn't just empty, it's actively hostile, waiting for the slightest weakness to remind us we don't belong there. Moon dust isn't just dirt, it's razor-sharp, chemically reactive, and clingy enough to invade every crevice of a spacesuit or habitat. Apollo astronauts quickly discovered its dangers. Grains finer than flour, shaped like microscopic shards of glass, scoured their visors, jammed equipment joints, and even snuck into the lunar module, leaving them coughing up black phlegm. On Earth, wind and water soften sand over time, but on the airless moon, these particles have been fracturing violently for billions of years, never eroding, never losing their jagged edges. The health risks are terrifying. When inhaled, these jagged grains slice into lung tissue, embedding themselves deep where the body can't expel them. Unlike earthly silica dust, dangerous but manageable lunar dust is loaded with iron and other metals that react violently with human cells. NASA studies show it can cause inflammation worse than asbestos, triggering long-term scarring that stiffens lungs into useless husks. And because gravity is weaker, the dust hangs in the air for hours, turning every habitat breach or suit removal into a potential biohazard. Mars presents its own nightmare. The planet's dust isn't just abrasive, it's laced with perchlorates, toxic salts that wreck thyroid function and burn skin on contact. A single gust of Martian wind could coat solar panels in a conductive layer, short-circuiting electronics, or contaminate life support systems. The worst part, there's no washing it off. With liquid water scarce, traditional cleaning methods won't work, meaning dust accumulates relentlessly in air filters, on tools, even inside astronauts' living quarters. Future missions are racing for solutions, from electrostatic repulsion systems to dust rooms, where astronauts decontaminate before re-entering habitats. But one thing's clear: until we conquer this invisible menace, every footstep on an alien world comes with a price, one our lungs might pay decades later. The very ground we dream of walking on could be plotting our slow demise, one razor-sharp particle at a time. Space doesn't tolerate shortcuts, and when equipment fails, the consequences are swift and brutal. Take Apollo 13, where a single spark inside an oxygen tank turned a moon mission into a desperate fight for survival. The explosion ripped through the service module, venting precious air into the void, while alarms screamed warnings no one had trained for. In seconds, 3 astronauts became stranded 200,000 miles from Earth, their ship crippled, their oxygen bleeding away. What saved them wasn't just ingenuity, it was sheer luck. A backup system, never meant for this scenario, became their lifeline. The chilling truth: Apollo 13 was far from unique. Every mission gambles with thousands of components, any one of which could doom the crew if it malfunctions. In 2013, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano nearly drowned during a spacewalk when his helmet filled with water from a clogged cooling line. Floating blind, his ears submerged, he fought panic as liquid crept into his nose and mouth. Only a frantic retreat to the airlock saved him. A flaw in a single valve nearly turned a routine task into a tragedy. Even the smallest oversight can spiral. In 1975, the Soviet Soyuz 19 capsule's parachute failed during re-entry, sending it crashing to Earth at 300 miles per hour. The crew survived barely because their seats absorbed impact forces that should have been fatal. Investigations later traced the fault to a single sensor damaged during assembly. No one noticed until it was too late. Modern spacecraft are engineering marvels, but complexity breeds vulnerability. The space shuttle's history is littered with close calls, cracked heat shields, faulty O-rings, and computer glitches that nearly aborted launches mid-ascent. Columbia's disintegration in 2003 revealed how easily insulating foam, a material meant to protect, could become a lethal projectile when it struck the shuttle's wing during takeoff. 7 astronauts paid the price for a flaw deemed acceptable in previous missions. Redundancies help, but they're not foolproof. When both primary and backup systems fail, as happened with the Mir space station's cascading fires and coolant leaks in 1997, improvisation becomes the only option. Astronauts have patched leaks with epoxy, jury-rigged air filters from duct tape, even manually docked spinning spacecraft when autopilot failed. These aren't feats of heroism, they're acts of desperation in an environment where mistakes multiply faster than solutions. The lesson is clear: space forgives nothing. A misplaced decimal in software, a loose bolt, or a frayed wire can unravel years of planning in moments. As we push deeper into the cosmos, the margin for error shrinks because out there, there's no repair shop, no backup crew, and no second chances. Every mission is a high-wire act, and the safety net is made of hope. Imagine shouting for help and waiting 22 minutes just to hear a response. Now picture that delay happening during a medical emergency on Mars. That's the chilling reality of interplanetary communication. Radio signals, even at the speed of light, take anywhere from 5 to 22 minutes to travel between Earth and Mars, depending on the planet's positions. A simple hello becomes a 44-minute round-trip conversation. But what happens when the message isn't casual chatter, but a desperate plea like oxygen leak or crew member unconscious? History offers sobering parallels. In 1997, Russian cosmonauts aboard the Mir space station faced a cascading crisis, a fire, then a coolant leak, while mission control debated responses over agonizing minutes. Now amplify that delay tenfold. On Mars, a bad burn, a ruptured suit, or even a psychological breakdown would unfold in horrific slow motion, with astronauts forced to make life or death decisions alone. NASA-owned simulations reveal the stakes. During a mock Mars mission, a crew member's injury led to a 17-minute debate about treatment protocols, a precious time a real patient wouldn't have. The lag isn't just about emergencies. Routine operations become high-stakes gambles. A rover collecting samples might misinterpret terrain and flip over, with engineers on Earth watching helplessly as the disaster plays out with a 20-minute delay. Even simple tasks like adjusting life support settings require crews to anticipate problems before they arise, because by the time Earth spots an anomaly, it could be too late. Solutions are as patchwork as they are imperfect. AI systems may one day handle immediate crises, but trusting algorithms with human lives raises ethical quagmires. Pre-written protocols help, but no manual can cover every scenario. The brutal truth: Mars-bound astronauts won't just be explorers. They'll be their own mission control, making irreversible calls in the silence between signals. Every transmission will carry the weight of a question. Can we survive long enough to hear the answer? We've spent decades sterilizing Mars rovers to avoid contaminating other worlds, but what if the real danger is what those worlds might contaminate us with? The moment astronauts scoop up alien soil or chip ice from a Martian glacier, they could be unleashing microbes unlike anything evolution has prepared us for. Imagine a pathogen so foreign our immune systems don't even recognize it as a threat. No antibodies, no inflammatory response, just silent invasion as it hijacks our cells using biochemistry we can't begin to anticipate. History shows the devastation when isolated ecosystems collide. When European explorers reached the Americas, smallpox and measles ravaged indigenous populations precisely because those communities had zero immunological memory of those diseases. Now extrapolate that to organisms potentially billions of years removed from Earth's tree of life. The Viking landers in the 1970s detected puzzling chemical reactions in Martian soil that some scientists argued resembled microbial metabolism. While inconclusive, the finding raises a terrifying question. What if the red planet isn't lifeless after all, but hosts organisms so alien our tests can't even detect them properly? The nightmare scenario: a crew member tracking regolith into their habitat after a surface excursion. Maybe they scratch an itch, rub their eyes, or inhale dust particles during suit removal. Days later, headaches start, then seizures. By the time mission control sees the symptoms via delayed video feed, half the crew is coughing up black fluid as their nervous systems short-circuit. There are no antibiotics for something that doesn't share Earth's genetic code. No antivirals for proteins folded in ways our science has never documented. And here's where it gets worse: containment in microgravity is nearly impossible. On Earth, pathogens settle on surfaces. In orbit, every cough sends infectious particles drifting through ventilation systems. The Apollo quarantine protocols after moon landings were theater at best. Had lunar dust carried deadly microbes, the plastic suits and flimsy isolation trailers would have failed spectacularly. Today's planetary protection guidelines rely on hope as much as science, treating alien biology as a hypothetical rather than the existential risk it could become. Yet the greatest threat might not be to astronauts, it's what they could bring home. A single speck of Mars dust trapped in a sample return container could escape into Earth's biosphere, finding endless hosts in our oxygen-rich, water-drenched world. Scientists speculate that extraterrestrial microbes might metabolize metals or thrive in extreme acidity, making our industrial sites and even our bloodstreams potential buffets. The twist: by the time we confirm alien life exists, it might already be coursing through our veins. We drill into Antarctic ice searching for primordial Earth microbes under sterile protocols, yet we cheer at the thought of astronauts gardening in Martian greenhouses. The contradiction reveals our blind spot. We see space exploration as conquest rather than cautionary tale. The universe has had billions of years to cook up horrors our labs can't imagine. One wrong scoop, one cracked sample tube, and we might unleash the ultimate pandemic, one we're evolutionarily defenseless against. You might think starvation is an ancient threat, something conquered by modern logistics. But in space, the line between abundance and empty stomachs is razor thin. Imagine watching your last lettuce crop wither under malfunctioning grow lights, or realizing the next supply ship won't arrive for 6 extra months because of a solar storm. There are no grocery stores in orbit, no backup pantries, just the cruel math of calories consumed versus calories delivered. The International Space Station keeps a tight inventory, with crews often reporting they've run low on favorite foods long before resupply. But that's child's play compared to deep space missions. On Mars, a single crop failure could mean months without fresh vitamins, leading to scurvy or worse. NASA experiments with hydroponic lettuce and radishes are promising, but what happens when a fungal outbreak, like the one that devastated a simulated lunar greenhouse in 2022, turns your entire harvest into a slimy mess? Suddenly, those freeze-dried emergency rations become your only lifeline. And it's not just about quantity. Space alters food at a molecular level. Studies show that nutrient absorption plummets in microgravity, meaning astronauts could eat enough, but still waste away from hidden deficiencies. Vitamin D vanishes without sunlight, iron isn't processed efficiently, and probiotics critical for gut health die off faster in cosmic radiation. Even the psychological toll is devastating. On Earth, food is comfort. In space, monotony breeds menu fatigue, where crew members skip meals rather than face another bland, rehydrated stew. The Apollo missions lasted days. The ISS resupplies every few months, but a Mars colony, one delayed cargo ship, say, by a launchpad explosion or orbital debris collision, and suddenly you're rationing protein paste while your muscles atrophy. History offers grim precedents. Antarctic explorers like Robert Falcon Scott perished partly because supply depots were misplaced by mere miles. In space, there are no second chances, only the unforgiving calculus of hunger against the void. Surviving isn't just about packing extra snacks. It's about redesigning agriculture from the ground up under domes where every drop of water is recycled. Every watt of artificial sunlight costs precious energy, and every seed must defy mutations caused by cosmic rays. The silent killer isn't explosive decompression or solar flares. It's the slow creep of an empty belly in a place where no one can hear you starve. Imagine trying to sleep while strapped to a vibrating rocket engine, because that's essentially life aboard a spacecraft. Between the relentless hum of life support systems, the glare of emergency lights, and the absence of natural day-night cycles, astronauts average just 6 hours of fractured sleep per night. That's less than most parents of newborns get, but in space, exhaustion isn't just inconvenient. It's a critical systems failure in the human brain, one that's nearly caused catastrophes. Take the near disaster during the Gemini 7 mission. After 11 days of zero gravity, frigid temperatures, and chronic sleeplessness, astronaut Jim Lovell began hallucinating. Flashes of light danced in his vision, and his concentration frayed like a snapped tether. During a critical docking simulation, he misread controls errors that could have doomed the mission if his crewmate hadn't caught them. NASA later discovered that sleep-deprived astronauts make 50% more mistakes during high-stakes operations, with reaction times comparable to being legally drunk. The root of the problem: space mocks every cue our brains rely on for rest. On Earth, sunlight regulates our circadian rhythms, but the International Space Station hurtles through 16 sunrises and sunsets every 24 hours. Blue light exposure from screens and equipment further scrambles melatonin production, leaving crews in a perpetual state of jet lag. Even the act of sleeping defies biology, floating in a bag anchored to the wall, your arms drifting like jellyfish tendrils unless you wedge them under straps. One astronaut described it as trying to nap inside a closet-sized tumble dryer set to gentle, and the consequences multiply. Studies show that after 72 hours without proper sleep, cognitive function plummets to levels rivaling severe intoxication. Fine motor skills deteriorate, making delicate repairs perilous. Mood swings intensify, a terrifying prospect when crew tensions already simmer in close quarters. During a 2013 incident, sleep-deprived astronauts mishandled a critical ammonia leak repair, nearly flooding their suits with toxic coolant. The investigation revealed they'd averaged 4 hours of sleep for days prior. Countermeasures exist, but they're imperfect. Sleep medications are risky in emergencies where split-second decisions matter. Blackout masks help with light, but nothing stops the vibration of machinery or the clatter of tools drifting through the cabin. NASA are experimenting with LED lighting that mimics Earth's day-night cycle, yet one truth remains. Until we replicate gravity and silence, space will keep stealing the very rest that keeps astronauts alive. The cruel irony: the mission that demands peak performance also denies the sleep required to achieve it. Fire doesn't crawl, it spreads in all directions at once, a silent explosion with no up or down to contain it. In the weightless nightmare of space, flames don't dance upward like they do on Earth. Instead, they form eerie, floating spheres of destruction that cling to surfaces and creep along oxygen lines like a living thing. The Mir space station crew learned this the hard way in 1997, when a malfunctioning oxygen generator erupted into a fist-sized fireball. Within seconds, that tiny blaze grew into a writhing, molten fist that filled the module with toxic smoke so thick, astronauts couldn't see their own gloved hands. The physics behind zero-G fires defy intuition. Without gravity, hot air doesn't rise, so there's no natural convection to carry away heat or smoke. Flames burn cooler but linger longer, smoldering in place like ghostly blue halos. Worse, molten droplets of burning metal, normally pulled downward by gravity, drift freely, igniting anything they touch. During the Mir incident, the crew watched in horror as globules of molten lithium perchlorate from the burning canister floated through the cabin, each one capable of starting new fires. Their extinguishers, designed for Earth-like flames, barely made a dent. Firefighting in space is a desperate gamble. Traditional water-based systems are useless. Liquid just forms floating blobs that could short-circuit electronics. Mir's crew had to resort to manual fire extinguishers that sprayed choking clouds of carbon dioxide, but in a sealed environment that risks suffocating everyone on board. NASA experiments reveal even worse quirks. Some materials that are fireproof on Earth, like certain metals, become highly flammable in pure oxygen environments. And because space stations recycle air, a single fire can poison the entire atmosphere for days with lingering toxins. The aftermath of Mir's fire reads like a horror story. The crew, already exhausted from equipment failures, spent hours in gas masks, scrubbing soot from walls with wet towels while their eyes burned from residual chemicals. Communication with ground control was nearly impossible through the chaos, forcing them to make life or death decisions alone. The station's air filters were so clogged with smoke particles that carbon dioxide levels spiked dangerously for weeks afterward. Modern spacecraft have improved protocols, but the core danger remains. The International Space Station now uses flame-resistant materials and segmented airflow to contain blazes, yet astronauts still train for worst-case scenarios by fighting controlled fires inside special aircraft that simulate microgravity. The drills are brutal. Crews practice escaping through pitch-black corridors filled with synthetic smoke, learning to navigate by touch alone. Because in space, fire isn't just a threat, it's a shape-shifting predator with no natural enemy. One spark, one faulty wire, and every breath you take could feed the very thing that kills you. Water is the lifeline of any space mission until it becomes a death sentence. In the closed-loop systems of spacecraft and space stations, every drop of sweat, every breath of moisture, even the humidity in your clothes gets reclaimed and recycled. That purified water keeps crews alive until something goes wrong. A single malfunctioning filter, a tiny breach in storage tanks, and suddenly your drinking supply is laced with heavy metals or floating bacteria. The International Space Station has had multiple close calls where cooling system chemicals leaked into potable water, forcing crews to ration from emergency reserves while engineers scrambled for a fix millions of miles away. The danger isn't just mechanical failure, it's biological warfare in miniature. In 2009, astronauts discovered their water dispenser nozzles clogged with a mysterious biofilm. Lab tests later identified it as a strain of bacteria that had evolved onboard, resistant to standard disinfectants. This wasn't just a nuisance. These microbes could trigger infections in already weakened immune systems. And that's in low Earth orbit. Imagine the same scenario on Mars, where no resupply mission can rush replacement filters. The longer the mission, the more time organisms have to mutate in the radiation-rich environment, potentially spawning superbugs our antibiotics can't touch. Then there's the algae problem. Early experiments with bioregenerative life support systems showed promise using algae to produce oxygen and filter wastewater. Until the algae started overproducing toxins or choking the machinery. In one ground simulation, a single species of cyanobacteria bloomed out of control overnight, releasing neurotoxic compounds that would have killed a crew had it happened in space. Modern systems use more controlled spirulina strains, but the risk remains. What grows to save you might also learn to kill you. The real horror isn't immediate poisoning, it's the slow creep of scarcity. When the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated in 2003, investigators found its crew's emergency water bags had been leaking for days prior to re-entry. The astronauts, unaware, were gradually dehydrating while focused on other tasks. Now amplify that over a 3-year Mars mission. A tiny, undetected leak could drain reserves silently, leaving crews to ration sips while their kidneys falter. Contamination turns this scarcity lethal, forcing an impossible choice. Drink poisoned water or die of thirst. Water recycling is a marvel of engineering, but also a single point of catastrophic failure. Every flush, every droplet of condensation is a gamble against entropy. Because in space, the very thing that keeps you alive might also be plotting against you, one mutated microbe, one faulty valve at a time. One moment you're floating effortlessly after months in zero gravity. The next, you're struggling to lift your own head as Mars gravity clamps down like an invisible vise. This brutal transition isn't just uncomfortable, it's a physiological ambush known as space adaptation syndrome. And it turns even simple movements into Herculean tasks. When the Apollo crews returned from the moon, several vomited upon splashdown, their vestibular systems screaming in confusion after days of lunar gravity. Now imagine that same shock magnified tenfold after a 9-month weightless journey to Mars, where crews must land precisely and function immediately in 0.38 G. No time for recovery, no margin for error. The inner ear becomes a traitor in these moments. After prolonged weightlessness, the delicate otolith organs tiny calcium crystals that sense gravity essentially go dormant. When gravity returns, they flood the brain with conflicting signals, triggering vertigo so severe some astronauts report feeling like they're tumbling headfirst even while lying still. During early space shuttle missions, up to 70% of crew members experienced nausea so intense they couldn't perform tasks for hours. That's manageable in low Earth orbit with ground support, but disastrous when attempting a precision landing on an alien world. Picture trying to operate landing thrusters or emergency protocols while your vision spins and stomach convulses. Muscles betray you just as cruelly. In microgravity, the body ditches what it deems unnecessary, shedding up to 20% of muscle mass in just 2 weeks. The anti-gravity muscles, calves, quadriceps, spinal erectors wither fastest. Upon landing, standing upright feels like bench pressing your own body weight after years of bed rest. NASA bed rest studies, where volunteers lie at 6-degree head-down tilts to simulate weightlessness, show even young test subjects needing wheelchairs for days after readaptation. Now apply that to Mars explorers who may need to sprint from a crashing lander or haul injured crewmates across rocky terrain. The cardiovascular system plays its own cruel joke. Without gravity's constant pull, blood redistributes upward, causing astronauts' faces to puff while their legs become stick-thin chicken bones. Upon re-exposure to gravity, this pooled blood suddenly rushes downward, triggering dizziness or even fainting, a condition called orthostatic intolerance. During one Soyuz landing, a cosmonaut's blood pressure plummeted so severely he passed out trying to exit the capsule. On Mars, where emergency egress might mean life or death, blacking out at the wrong moment could doom an entire mission. Countermeasures exist, but they're imperfect. The Russian Berkovich suit squeezes the legs to prevent blood pooling, while NASA's zero-G treadmill helps preserve muscle tone. Yet none fully prevent adaptation syndrome's worst effects. Artificial gravity centrifuges show promise but remain impractical for current spacecraft. Medications like scopolamine patch nausea, but at the cost of drowsiness and slowed reflexes unacceptable during high-stakes landings. Mars amplifies every danger. Unlike the Moon's brief exposure, crews will live for years in partial gravity, never fully Earth-strong but never weightless enough to avoid readaptation hell upon return. Some scientists fear this gravity purgatory could cause permanent changes to bone structure and circulation. The first Martians may pay a terrible price for walking between worlds, not just in weakened bodies, but in the lingering vertigo that makes Earth's gravity feel like an unbearable weight. The bitter irony, after surviving cosmic radiation, equipment failures, and psychological torment, the very act of arriving safely might leave explorers too debilitated to plant their flag. Space adaptation syndrome isn't just nausea, it's the universe's last laugh, reminding us that no matter how far we travel, our bodies remain stubbornly, fatally earthbound. A scalpel slips in a surgeon's hand on Earth, and it's a mistake in space. It becomes a deadly floating projectile. Performing even routine medical procedures in zero gravity transforms into a high-stakes nightmare where blood doesn't drip, it forms hovering crimson globules that cling to instruments, obscuring the operating field. NASA simulations reveal the grim reality. Stitching a simple wound takes 3 times longer in microgravity, with sutures curling unpredictably like living threads. Now imagine attempting an appendectomy or setting a compound fracture under those conditions without a single surgeon on board, and with the nearest hospital 200 miles straight down. The roster of a Mars-bound crew won't include a neurosurgeon or cardiologist. At best, there'll be one crew member with rudimentary trauma training, perhaps a former military medic doubling as the mission botanist. Their medical kit, a pared-down assortment of antibiotics, painkillers, and dental cement, all while relying on AI diagnostics that might misinterpret symptoms in an environment where human physiology behaves unpredictably. Take kidney stones. On Earth, they're painful but manageable. In space, dehydration and bone loss spike their likelihood, and passing 1 in 0G could mean writhing in agony while tiny mineral shards drift into the urinary tract sideways, risking tears and sepsis. Emergency evacuations aren't just impractical, they're pure fantasy. The fastest return from Mars would take 7 months under ideal orbital mechanics, assuming a ship is even prepped and fueled for launch. During Apollo 13, astronauts survived an oxygen tank explosion because Earth was 3 days away. On the red planet, a burst appendix or a skull fracture from a fall in low gravity becomes a death sentence with no appeal. Even the International Space Station's rapid Soyuz descent takes over 3 hours, an eternity for someone bleeding internally. Diseases evolve too. A simple staph infection, routine on Earth, could rage unchecked in the confined, recycled air of a habitat. Radiation-weakened immune systems struggle to fight pathogens, and standard antibiotics may fail against bacteria mutating in the cosmic radiation bath. When researchers sealed volunteers inside the Biosphere 2 habitat in the 90s, they discovered ordinary skin flora had evolved antibiotic resistance within months. Now picture that accelerated in space where radiation turbocharges mutations. The first crew member to spike a fever might unknowingly host a superbug that's been incubating in the ship's ventilation filters for years. Psychological breakdowns compound the danger. There's no sedative strong enough to calm a crew member experiencing psychotic episodes when you're 6 light minutes from psychiatric advice. During the Soyuz 3 mission, cosmonaut Boris Volynov hallucinated so severely during re-entry that he nearly crashed his capsule, convinced alien voices were guiding him. Modern protocols include antipsychotics, but medicating someone against their will in confinement could spark violence, or leave them too groggy to function in a crisis. The cruelest twist: telemedicine's limitations. That 20-minute lag to Mars means a surgeon on Earth watches a patient hemorrhage in horrifying slow motion, every instruction arriving too late. Robotic surgery systems like the one tested on the ISS in 2024 can't handle complex procedures autonomously. One glitch during a simulated appendectomy sent the robot's arm flailing wildly, a mistake that would have gutted a real patient. Even diagnostic tools falter. Ultrasound probes float away mid-scan, and blood samples separate differently in 0G, yielding false results. Every mission is a gamble that no one will need more than a stitch or a painkiller. But history whispers warnings. During the 1968 Zond 5 mission, tortoises orbited the Moon and returned paralyzed, their spines irreparably damaged by forces we still don't fully understand. If that happened to a human on Mars, there'd be no wheelchair, no physical therapy, just a crewmate slowly suffocating as their diaphragm muscles fail. Space doesn't just kill with explosions or radiation sometimes. It's the absence of a single pair of skilled hands that seals your fate. Rocket fuel doesn't just burn, it erupts with the fury of a caged star. Hydrazine, the toxic lifeblood of many spacecraft thrusters, is so unstable it ignites on contact with a single speck of rust, dissolving flesh on contact while choking victims with its sweet, lethal vapor. This isn't hypothetical danger, it's written in the scars of launchpad history. Take the Amos 6 disaster. In 2016, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket sat quietly on the pad during a routine test when, in less than a tenth of a second, 2,000 tons of fuel and oxidizer detonated in a fireball so bright it blinded cameras a mile away. The explosion wasn't caused by a dramatic collision or human error, just a tiny bubble of supercooled oxygen trapped in a carbon fiber helium tank, a flaw no one knew existed until it was too late. What makes hydrazine so terrifying is its eagerness to react. Unlike gasoline, which needs a spark, this corrosive liquid hypergolic fuel combusts instantly when mixed with oxidizers like nitrogen tetroxide, no ignition required. During the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975, a faulty valve leaked nitrogen tetroxide into the cabin, nearly killing the crew as their lungs filled with acidic fluid. Those who survived spent weeks in intensive care, their throats scorched raw. Modern safety protocols include pressure suits and scrubbers, but the risk remains. One cracked seal, one misaligned fuel line, and astronauts could be breathing poison before they even reach orbit. The violence of these explosions defies imagination. When a Delta II rocket carrying a GPS satellite blew up in 1997, the shockwave hurled half-ton debris chunks over half a mile, some embedding themselves 12 feet into concrete. Investigators later traced the cause to a single frayed wire in the first-stage engine, a flaw smaller than a fingernail clipping. Even safe fuels like liquid hydrogen have their demons. In 1967, Apollo 1's pure oxygen cabin environment turned a minor electrical short into an inferno that killed 3 astronauts in seconds, their space-suited bodies melting into the capsule's floor. Storage is another nightmare. Hydrazine decomposes over time, forming crystals that can clog fuel lines or, worse, become unstable explosives themselves. The USSR learned this brutally in 1980 when a leaking satellite fuel tank rained toxic debris over Siberia, contaminating an area the size of Luxembourg. Cleaning it up required soldiers in makeshift hazmat suits, dozens of whom suffered permanent liver damage. Today's unmanned satellites carry hundreds of pounds of this fuel, each a potential dirty bomb waiting to scatter poison across the upper atmosphere during re-entry. Modern rocketry tries to tame these beasts with fail-safes, helium purges to prevent gas bubbles, triple redundant valves, and laser sensors that detect micro-leaks. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Spaceflight runs on chemistry that would give a lab safety officer nightmares, and every mission dances on the edge of catastrophe. The engines that push us toward the stars are, at their core, controlled explosions, and sometimes control is the first thing to go. A spacecraft's computer systems might seem like fortresses of code, but their vulnerabilities are terrifyingly real, and hackers know it. In 2008, NASA confirmed that the International Space Station's laptops had been infected with a worm designed to steal banking passwords. Think about that. Malware built for Earthbound identity theft found its way into orbit, riding piggyback on an astronaut's USB drive. If that sounds alarming, consider what a targeted attack could do. Modern spacecraft rely on thousands of lines of code, much of it legacy software never designed to fend off 21st century cyber warfare. One well-placed line of malicious code could disable life support, hijack navigation, or even trigger a catastrophic engine misfire, all while ground control watches helplessly. Satellite networks are shockingly porous. Researchers at DEF CON have repeatedly demonstrated how to seize control of weather and communication satellites using little more than a laptop and a repurposed TV dish. In 2018, hackers breached the U.S. Defense Department Satellite Communications Gateway, gaining access to systems that could have disrupted military operations worldwide. The attack wasn't some cinematic masterstroke. It exploited default passwords left unchanged since the 90s. Now extrapolate that to deep space missions. A Mars-bound vessel would need constant communication with Earth, each transmission a potential entry point for digital sabotage. The 20-minute signal lag means crews might not realize they've been hacked until their oxygen levels mysteriously plummet or their trajectory veers toward the sun. The stakes escalate with commercial spaceflight. Private companies often prioritize speed over security, skipping rigorous penetration testing to meet launch windows. In 2019, a cybersecurity firm found they could hijack a European Space Agency satellite by spoofing its GPS signals, a trick that could send a billion-dollar orbiter crashing into others, creating a debris cascade. Even uncrewed probes aren't safe. China's Mars rover Zhurong went silent in 2022, with some experts suspecting an onboard software glitch induced by cosmic radiation. Or something more sinister, space agencies are racing to adapt. The Artemis program uses blockchain-like encryption for its moon missions, while the Air Force deploys AI guard dogs to monitor satellite traffic for anomalies. But the arms race is lopsided. Hackers need to find just one vulnerability, while engineers must defend thousands. The next frontier of warfare won't be fought with missiles, but with lines of code that can turn a spacecraft into a drifting coffin or a weapon aimed at Earth itself. A basketball-sized meteoroid screaming through Earth's atmosphere at 40,000 miles per hour doesn't just burn up, it explodes with the force of 20 Hiroshima bombs. That's what happened over Chelyabinsk, Russia in 2013, when a 6,500-ton space rock barely 19 meters wide detonated 15 miles above the city. The shockwave shattered windows across 200 square miles, injured over 1,500 people, and released 30 times more energy than we'd predicted based on its size. Now imagine that same kinetic punch slamming into a lunar base or Mars habitat, where paper-thin walls offer zero protection against cosmic shrapnel. The Chelyabinsk event was a wake-up call. Before that day, astronomers estimated such impacts occurred once every 100 years. The reality, small meteoroids like that bombard Earth weekly. We just don't notice because most explode over oceans or uninhabited areas. In space, there's no atmosphere to burn up incoming debris. Even a pebble traveling at orbital velocities carries the punch of an artillery shell. When a mere half-millimeter aluminum sphere was fired at 16,000 miles per hour during NASA tests, it punched straight through 10 centimeters of solid metal. That's nothing compared to the natural bullets flying through the asteroid belt. Moon colonists will face this threat constantly. Without atmospheric protection, the lunar surface gets pummeled by everything from dust-sized particles to fist-sized projectiles. Apollo astronauts found their landers pitted with microcraters after just days on the surface. Modern simulations show a habitat on Mars would statistically endure at least one Chelyabinsk-scale impact every 50 years, and that's not counting the constant peppering from smaller debris. A single grape-sized meteoroid could rupture a greenhouse dome, decompress a living module, or sever vital oxygen lines before anyone hears the impact. Early warning systems offer limited help. While Earth-based telescopes track larger asteroids, objects under 50 meters wide like Chelyabinsk are nearly invisible until they're already screaming through the atmosphere. The B612 Foundation estimates we've spotted less than 1% of near-Earth asteroids capable of regional destruction. For Mars or lunar settlements, spotting incoming threats is even harder without massive orbital surveillance networks. By the time ground radar detects a meteoroid, evacuation might be impossible, especially if it's traveling at the 45,000 mile/hour average speed of Mars-crossing debris. Shielding techniques border on science fiction. NASA experiments with self-healing materials filled with liquid sealant that hardens upon impact, while other designs propose burying habitats under meters of regolith. The most extreme concept, magnetic force fields that vaporize incoming particles into harmless plasma. But current technology forces brutal trade-offs. The thicker your walls, the less radiation shielding you can carry, and vice versa. Every kilogram of meteoroid armor is a kilogram subtracted from life support or food stores. The cruelest twist, some meteoroids aren't random, they're man-made. Dead satellites, discarded rocket stages, and even flecks of paint from decades-old missions now orbit at bullet speeds. In 1983, a tiny paint chip chipped the Space Shuttle Challenger's window, leaving a quarter-inch crater. Multiply that risk across thousands of future space stations and moon bases, and you've got a shooting gallery where every stray bolt could be tomorrow's catastrophe. Space doesn't care about human timelines. The dinosaurs learned that lesson 66 million years ago when a 6-mile-wide asteroid rewrote planetary history. Our species faces the same physics, just on a smaller scale. One quiet morning on Mars, while colonists sip recycled coffee, a silent black dot growing in the pink sky could rewrite humanity's future in the time it takes to say, "What was that?" The universe plays for keeps, and meteoroids are its favorite dice. Artificial gravity sounds like the perfect solution to muscle atrophy and bone loss until the spinning stops. Picture a Mars-bound ship with a rotating crew module, its gentle spin creating Earth-like gravity to keep astronauts healthy. Now imagine that system jamming suddenly, sending the habitat lurching into an uncontrolled tumble. What was once a lifesaver becomes a meat grinder, hurling crew members into walls with the force of a car crash while equipment tears loose to pinball through the cabin. The physics behind rotational gravity hides brutal dangers. To simulate one Earth gravity, a 100-meter-wide station would need to complete a full rotation roughly every 20 seconds, slow enough that most people adapt without nausea. But shrink that diameter to fit real-world spacecraft constraints, and the required spin rate skyrockets. At just 10 meters wide, achieving 1G demands a rotation every 6 seconds, a dizzying speed where even slight imbalances trigger violent vibrations. Early experiments in the 1960s proved how quickly things go wrong. Volunteers in NASA rotating room trials vomited within minutes when the spin destabilized, their inner ears rebelling against conflicting motion cues. Some couldn't walk straight for days afterward, their neural pathways scrambled by the experience. Motion sickness is the least of the worries when systems fail. A malfunctioning bearing or power fluctuation could send the rotation rate spiraling out of control. At double the intended speed, that comforting 1G becomes 2 enough to leave crew members pinned to the floor, ribs cracking under their own weight. Conversely, a sudden slowdown might drop gravity to near zero mid-stride, sending someone catapulting headfirst into the ceiling. The Russian Cosmograd space station concept included emergency protocols for such scenarios, explosive bolts to jettison the rotating section entirely if stabilization failed. Modern designs rely on gyroscopes and thrusters, but no failsafe is perfect, especially when a micrometeoroid punch or software glitch sends corrective systems offline. Then there's the Coriolis effect, a sneaky sidekick to rotational gravity. On Earth, it influences weather patterns. In a spinning spacecraft, it turns simple actions into perilous feats. Toss a wrench to a crewmate, and the object appears to curve unnaturally sideways as the habitat rotates beneath it. Pour water, and the liquid spirals like it's possessed. Even walking becomes a challenge, with legs experiencing different forces depending on whether they are moving with or against the spin. During Skylab experiments, astronauts attempting locomotion in a rotating section reported dizziness so severe they crawled rather than risk falling. Now extrapolate that to months or years aboard a Mars transfer vehicle where a misstep could mean broken limbs against unforgiving metal walls. Human physiology wasn't designed for this variable gravity experiment. Rapid transitions between spin zones and weightless hubs could shred the vestibular system's ability to adapt. Vision blurs as eyeballs deform under fluctuating pressure. Blood vessels struggle to constrict or dilate fast enough, causing fainting spells when moving between sections. Some scientists warn that prolonged exposure might rewire neural pathways permanently, leaving astronauts unable to function in any gravity environment without debilitating disorientation. Engineering solutions exist in theory but falter in practice. Magnetic bearings promise frictionless rotation until solar flares scramble their fields. Flywheel designs offer smooth momentum, but a single seized component turns them into wrecking balls. The brutal truth: every artificial gravity system trades one set of space hazards for another. What keeps you healthy today might break your spine tomorrow when the universe reminds you, physics always wins. A spacesuit isn't just clothing, it's a wearable spacecraft, a pressurized cocoon keeping astronauts alive in the void. But when that fragile barrier fails, the margin between life and death shrinks to the width of a glove seam. Take the nightmare scenario of an overheated suit. During the first American spacewalk in 1965, Ed White's visor fogged so severely from his own exhaled moisture that he couldn't see his instruments, forcing an early end to the mission. Modern suits use liquid cooling garments and venting systems, yet they still flirt with disaster. A clogged sweat duct or malfunctioning pump can send temperatures skyrocketing past 120 degrees Fahrenheit within minutes. Imagine sprinting a marathon in a sauna while wearing a snowsuit, your oxygen supply dwindling as your brain bakes inside your helmet. Leaks turn lethal faster than most realize. In 1973, Skylab astronaut Pete Conrad noticed his suit pressure dropping during a spacewalk, not from a dramatic tear, but a tiny O-ring failure in his life support pack. Had it continued, his blood would have begun boiling in under 90 seconds. Today's suits have redundant pressure layers, but redundancy means nothing when a micrometeoroid punches through multiple sections at once. The European Space Agency's testing proves even millimeter-wide projectiles traveling at orbital speeds can rip through 10 layers of Kevlar and Mylar, leaving a hole wider than a pencil, enough to drain a suit's oxygen in under 2 minutes. Then there's the tether, that flimsy lifeline connecting astronauts to their ship. During a 2017 International Space Station spacewalk, a frayed tether nearly snapped under tension, saved only by a backup clip. Had it failed, the astronaut would have drifted away at 4 miles per hour, too slow to feel catastrophic, yet too fast to grab anything during the brief window before disappearing into eternal orbit. NASA contingency, a risky jetpack called Safer with just enough fuel for one desperate correction burn. Get the angle wrong and you're not just stranded, you're accelerating toward deeper space. The cruelest part, some failures compound silently. A slow coolant leak might first manifest as fogging on the helmet's neck ring, easy to miss until dizziness sets in from carbon dioxide buildup. Or consider the gloves, rigid enough to resist vacuum, yet flexible enough for delicate work. That balancing act leaves them prone to fingertip tears, especially after hours of grappling with sharp-edged equipment. In 2013, Luca Parmitano's suit flooded not from an external breach, but an internally clogged waterline that backflowed into his helmet. Floating blind with liquid covering his nose and mouth, his only path to safety was memorizing the handrail sequence back to the airlock by touch alone. Redundancies create their own nightmares. More valves mean more failure points. More padding means less mobility. Every added safety feature steals energy from the suit's already strained systems, trading one risk for another. Future Mars suits will face even grimmer calculus. Thicker armor against radiation means heavier suits that exhaust wearers faster. Spend too long outside, and muscle fatigue could leave an astronaut too weak to climb back into their rover. The suits that let us walk among the stars are technological masterpieces, but they're also ticking clocks. Each minute outside the airlock, another spin of the cosmic roulette wheel. Mars doesn't just have dust storms, it has apocalypses in slow motion. Picture a wall of rust-colored dust taller than Mount Everest, rolling across the landscape at 60 miles per hour, swallowing entire regions in a suffocating haze that lasts not days or weeks but months. This isn't some sci-fi exaggeration. It's what happened in 2018 when a planet-wide tempest silenced NASA's Opportunity rover forever. One moment, the solar-powered Explorer was transmitting data. The next, its panels were buried under a blanket of fine particles so thick, daylight turned to midnight. After 837 days of radio silence, engineers finally declared the mission over, not because the rover failed, but because the sun itself vanished for half a Martian year. These storms aren't just inconvenient, they rewrite the rules of survival. On Earth, even the worst dust storms dissipate in hours, limited by atmosphere and moisture. But Mars' thin air and lack of water let particles hang suspended for up to 8 months, creating a perpetual twilight where temperatures plummet and solar panels become useless decorations. The 2001 global storm, observed by the Hubble telescope, showed how quickly the entire planet can vanish under a uniform tan veil. For future colonists, this means calculating energy reserves not in days, but in seasons, stockpiling enough power to outlast a siege from the sky. The static cling of Martian dust makes everything worse. Unlike Earth dust that eventually settles, these electrostatic particles stick to every surface like metaphysical glue. During the Viking missions, cameras slowly lost clarity as grime coated their lenses, despite engineers' attempts to shake it loose. Modern rovers like Perseverance use specialized cleaning systems, but even they can't prevent gradual accumulation. Now imagine that same dust infiltrating habitat airlocks, clogging ventilator filters, and coating the visors of astronauts trying to navigate blizzard-like conditions outside. Unlike lunar regolith, which is sharp but dry, Martian dust is laced with perchlorates, toxic salts that burn skin and corrode electronics on contact. Every storm doesn't just block sunlight, it leaves behind a poisonous residue that could slowly strangle a colony's life support systems. Navigation becomes a lethal guessing game in these conditions. During a 2007 regional storm, the Spirit rover's solar output dropped so low it entered emergency hibernation, narrowly avoiding permanent shutdown. Human crews wouldn't have that luxury. Venturing outside during a storm would mean groping through zero visibility terrain where compasses fail. Mars lacks a global magnetic field, and GPS satellites don't exist. The Soviet Union's ill-fated Mars 3 lander in 1971 may have fallen victim to this very scenario. It transmitted for 20 seconds after touchdown during a massive dust event, then mysteriously died. Modern theorizing suggests its parachute may have been ripped away by violent winds, or its systems short-circuited by static-charged dust. The speed at which these storms escalate defies earthly logic. What begins as a localized swirl in Hellas Basin can balloon into a hemisphere-spanning monster in under a week, driven by temperature differentials 10 times more extreme than Earth's. Orbital assets like NASA Moro satellite now track these events with infrared sensors, but early warning systems still can't predict which storms will go global. For settlers, this means living with the constant threat of an energy blackout that could last longer than a pregnancy. 9 months without reliable solar power, without outdoor excursions, without rescue. The psychological toll would be crushing. Humans evolved to associate storms with catharsis, the relief of rain after a desert dust storm, the clarity following a blizzard. On Mars, storms don't cleanse, they smother. Crews might watch helplessly as their greenhouses starve for sunlight, their solar arrays dim to uselessness, and their world shrinks to the dim glow of emergency LEDs. The very air they breathe would depend on filters struggling against the invasive dust, while outside, the howling wind, inaudible in Mars' thin atmosphere but palpable as vibrations through habitat walls, becomes a silent, invisible predator. Engineering solutions exist in theory: nuclear-powered bases, wind turbines adapted for low-density air, even giant electrostatic dust repellents, but each workaround introduces new vulnerabilities. Reactors need rare isotopes hauled from Earth at astronomical cost. Wind turbines on Mars would require blades the size of football fields to catch meaningful energy from the thin atmosphere. And no technology yet invented can fully shield optics, machinery, or lungs from a world where the very soil seems determined to bury you alive, the greatest irony. These storms might make Mars more Earth-like in one terrible way by creating unpredictable weather of mass destruction that dictates survival. Future colonists won't fear asteroids or solar flares half as much as the day the horizon disappears behind a creeping tan fog, knowing their fate now depends on stored batteries and sheer stubbornness. On a planet already hostile to life, the dust doesn't just obscure the sun, it threatens to erase humanity's footprint entirely. Liquid hydrogen doesn't just freeze things, it redefines cold. At negative 423 degrees Fahrenheit, this rocket fuel chills materials beyond the limits of earthly physics, turning ordinary metals brittle as glass and freezing air itself into solid blocks. When the Apollo program's Saturn V rockets stood on the launch pad, ice would cascade from their liquid oxygen tanks like crystallized waterfalls, not from Florida humidity, but from atmospheric moisture flash freezing against the supercooled metal. That spectacle hides a deadly truth. Cryogenic fuels don't just power spacecraft, they wage constant war against the engineers who tame them. One misstep and flesh doesn't just frost over, it shatters. The horror stories write themselves. During a 1965 test at NASA's Plum Brook Station, a technician's ungloved hand brushed against a liquid nitrogen line for less than a second. The result, third-degree cryogenic burn so severe his skin fused to the metal, requiring surgeons to amputate frozen tissue down to the bone. Modern protocols mandate multilayer insulated gloves, but accidents still happen, like the 2007 incident where a Kennedy Space Center worker's boot ruptured during a hydrogen transfer, spraying his leg with fuel that instantly vaporized into an invisible flame. He survived only because colleagues hosed him down within seconds, preventing the supercold liquid from flash freezing his bloodstream. Tank ruptures escalate from tragedy to catastrophe in milliseconds. When Challenger's infamous O-ring failed in 1986, it wasn't the explosion that doomed the crew, it was the 80-ton reservoir of liquid oxygen and hydrogen-breaching containment. At those temperatures, metals fracture unpredictably. The Space Shuttle's external tank, for instance, used special aluminum alloys that became stronger when chilled, but weld imperfections could still trigger instantaneous cracks. Investigators later learned that ice chunks breaking loose during launch had pummeled Columbia's tank with enough force to damage critical insulation, a flaw that contributed to its destruction years later. Storage is its own nightmare. Liquid hydrogen must be kept within a razor-thin margin just 30 degrees above absolute zero, requiring tanks wrapped in vacuum-sealed thermos bottle insulation thicker than a mattress. Even then, boil-off is inevitable. The fuel literally evaporates while you're trying to hold it. NASA Artemis program loses thousands of gallons daily during launch preparations, a bleeding of resources that forces meticulous timing. Get the countdown wrong, and you're left with either a half-empty tank or a volatile overpressure situation where relief valves scream like tortured ghosts as they vent excess gas. The cruelest twist, these fuels demand absolute perfection while refusing to behave predictably. Liquid hydrogen's molecules are so small they can seep through seemingly solid metal, embrittling tank walls over time. During a 1998 Delta III launch, this phenomenon caused a hydrogen leak that detonated mid-flight, tearing the rocket apart 81 seconds after liftoff. Modern sensors can detect micro-leaks, but on Mars or the Moon, where launch windows are measured in weeks, not hours, a single faulty valve could strand colonists with no way to replace evaporated fuel. Handling cryogenics is like wrestling with antimatter. The tools that contain it are always one stress fracture away from failure. Every rocket that soars does so atop a frozen lightning bolt, a controlled catastrophe where the difference between triumph and disaster is thinner than the frost forming on its tanks. You might think surviving space is about physics and engineering, but the real killer could be the person sleeping 3 feet away. Confinement does something brutal to human psychology, peeling back social niceties until raw friction takes over. The Biosphere 2 experiment in the early 90s proved this in terrifying fashion. 8 scientists entered a sealed Arizona habitat meant to mimic a space colony, only to fracture into warring factions within months. One member sabotaged equipment by opening emergency vents. another stole hoarded food, and whisper campaigns turned minor disagreements into existential grudges. This wasn't a reality TV show, it was a warning. Space amplifies every petty grievance. Imagine sharing a bathroom with 5 people for 3 years, except the bathroom is also your office, gym, and dining room, and there's no door to slam when you've had enough. On Earth, co-workers can take walks to cool off. On the International Space Station, the furthest you can storm off is 12 feet before hitting a bulkhead. Astronauts train for years to suppress conflict, but humans aren't robots. Tensions simmer until they explode, like in 2009, when a NASA astronaut allegedly tried to sabotage a crewmate's romance with a rival by wearing diapers during a 1,000-mile cross-country drive to confront them. If Earthbound professionals crack under pressure, what happens when the same stresses unfold in a tin can, with no sunset to mark the end of a bad day? Sleep cycles become weapons in this pressure cooker. Research shows night owls paired with early risers in confined environments develop cortisol levels matching PTSD patients. The Mars 500 experiment, a 520-day simulated mission, saw one crew member descend into chronic sleep deprivation after enduring another's snoring, leading to errors in simulated emergency drills. NASA's solution mandating quiet hours and noise-canceling headphones, but no gadget fixes fundamental incompatibility when 2 people's nervous systems are locked in a silent war of rhythms. The selection process tries to weed out volatility, yet some traits only reveal themselves under prolonged stress. Psychologists use the apple test. Would you rather share a bus seat with someone eating an apple loudly for 8 hours or someone who invades your personal space? Neither option exists in space. You get both, plus the added thrill of knowing this person holds your oxygen supply in their hands during night shifts. Mere astronauts once held an intervention for a crewmate's body odor so severe it lingered in air filters for weeks. Now imagine that same tension, but with higher stakes, like during Apollo 7's mutiny, when astronauts refused orders from ground control, leading NASA to ban the crew from future missions. Cultural differences add another layer of dynamite. International Space Station crews navigate a minefield of unspoken norms, Americans' bluntness grating on Russians' hierarchical sensibilities, Europeans' formality clashing with Japanese indirectness. During a 2012 incident, a Russian cosmonaut reportedly scolded a NASA astronaut for unprofessional laughter during a serious equipment failure. These aren't misunderstandings, they're cracks in the foundation of trust needed for survival. The scariest part, there's no exit strategy. On Earth, HR departments mediate disputes. In deep space, you can't fire someone into the void, ethics aside. Future Mars missions may embed psychologists, but therapy requires honesty, hard to achieve when your therapist also controls your job assignments. The solution might lie in architecture, designing separate fume rooms where crew can vent without witnesses, or sleep pods with individualized climate controls. Yet ultimately, space doesn't care about our social contracts. The machines might be flawless, the radiation shielded, the food plentiful. But if humans can't stand each other, the mission was doomed before it left the pad. Cosmic rays leave no visible scars but peel back the layers of an astronaut's brain years after their mission, and the damage becomes horrifyingly clear. NASA's landmark study on mice exposed to simulated deep space radiation revealed neurons littered with protein plaques identical to those found in Alzheimer's patients, while synaptic connections withered like vines after frost. The mice, once agile maze navigators, staggered through tests, forgetting familiar routes and freezing in place as their brains literally shrank. Apply that to humans, and the implications are stomach-churning. A 6-month Mars voyage could inflict the neural equivalent of 20 years of terrestrial aging, with symptoms emerging long after return. What makes space radiation so insidious is its precision. Galactic cosmic rays, mostly high-energy ion nuclei, don't just bombard cells randomly. They slice through DNA like microscopic machetes, triggering cascades of inflammation that chew through brain tissue. Researchers at UC Irvine discovered these particles shred the hippocampus, the memory hub where new experiences form. Astronauts exposed to even moderate radiation develop space brain, a fog of forgetfulness where names slip away, procedures blur together, and split-second decisions lag. The scariest part, unlike muscle atrophy or bone loss, this damage appears irreversible. Autopsies on Apollo-era astronauts show elevated levels of beta-amyloid plaques, the same markers that ravage dementia patients decades after their flights. The speed of decline shocks experts. During a 2018 experiment, rats exposed to Mars-equivalent radiation for 6 weeks lost 30% of their prefrontal cortex function, the region governing judgment and impulse control. Translating that to a Mars mission means commanders potentially forgetting emergency protocols or misreading landing coordinates during critical moments. NASA twin study confirms the horror. While Scott Kelly's one-year ISS stint showed minor cognitive slowdowns, his telomeres, protective caps on chromosomes linked to aging, shortened dramatically. Extended deep space travel could effectively fast-forward the brain's biological clock, leaving 40-year-old astronauts with the neural fragility of 70-year-olds. Current countermeasures border on futile. Aluminum shielding, the standard for spacecraft hulls, actually worsens the problem by splintering cosmic rays into secondary particles. Scientists experiment with hydrogen-rich materials like polyethylene or water walls, but no feasible design blocks all radiation without adding impossible weight. Pharmaceutical interventions show slim promise. A 2023 trial found diabetes drug metformin might slightly mitigate neural damage in irradiated mice, but human trials are years away. The brutal reality: every astronaut venturing beyond Earth's magnetic shield trades brain cells for mileage, their synapses quietly unraveling beneath the stars. Perhaps the cruelest twist is the delay. Symptoms surface years post-mission, long after medical exams declare astronauts recovered. Apollo veterans reported unexplained memory lapses and mood disorders decades later, dismissed as normal aging until autopsies revealed telltale neurodegeneration. For Mars colonists, this means a double betrayal, surviving the voyage only to watch their minds dissolve on the very world they sacrificed everything to reach. The cosmos doesn't just kill with violence, it erases you slowly, turning pioneers into amnesiacs who can't remember why they left Earth in the first place. The human body isn't built for the violence of escaping gravity's grip. During launch, astronauts don't just feel acceleration, they're crushed into their seats like bugs under a boot, with forces up to 4 times Earth's gravity pressing down on every cell. Blood sloshes away from the brain, tunneling vision into a narrowing gray haze until consciousness flickers. This isn't just discomfort, it's your cardiovascular system screaming in protest, fighting to keep oxygen flowing against physics trying to empty your skull like a tipped-over water bottle. History offers brutal examples of what happens when G-forces spiral out of control. In 1967, Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov's Soyuz 1 capsule spun wildly during re-entry, subjecting him to over 8 Gs, equivalent to an elephant sitting on his chest. Autopsies revealed his heart had literally ruptured from the strain, a grim testament to how quickly acceleration turns lethal. Even controlled re-entries pushed the limit. Space shuttle crews regularly endured eyeballs down deceleration peaks of 3 Gs, their faces sagging into grotesque masks as internal organs flattened under the load. The danger isn't just about raw numbers, it's timing. Fighter pilots can handle 8 or 9 Gs briefly with specialized G-suits that squeeze their legs to prevent blackouts. But rocket launches demand sustained high G exposure for minutes at a stretch, a marathon of torment where every second stretches into agony. During Mercury missions, astronauts trained in centrifuges until capillaries burst in their eyes, leaving them staring through a spiderweb of hemorrhages. Modern crews still vomit routinely in early launch phases, their stomachs protesting as G-forces distort organ positions like putty. Re-entry amplifies the nightmare. As capsules slam into the atmosphere at 25 times the speed of sound, friction turns their heat shields into glowing plasma while deceleration spikes unpredictably. The Apollo crews described it as a train wreck followed by a car crash followed by falling off a building. First a crushing wall of force, then violent oscillations that whip the body like a rag doll. In 2008, Soyuz TMA-11's ballistic re-entry subjected its crew to 8.5 Gs when the capsule tumbled uncontrolled, leaving one astronaut temporarily blinded and another with spinal injuries that took months to heal. Children's bones bend under extreme pressure, adult bones snap. This simple fact becomes horrifying when considering emergency abort scenarios. During Space Shuttle Challenger's breakup, investigators calculated that some crew members likely remained conscious for over 2 minutes as their cabin pinwheeled through the stratosphere at over 200 Gs forces that would liquefy internal organs before the brain could process the pain. Even successful aborts like Soyuz MS-10's 6.5 G escape rocket ride in 2018 leave crews battered with burst blood vessels and concussion-like symptoms. The cruel paradox: our bodies evolved for 1G, deviate too far and systems fail catastrophically. Prolonged high-G exposure shreds muscle fibers, collapses alveoli in the lungs, and can even detach retinas. A phenomenon fighter jocks call red out when capillaries explode across their eyeballs. NASA studies show cerebral blood flow drops 30% at just 3 Gs, explaining why trainees in centrifuges often can't recall their own names during testing. Future Mars missions plan gentler acceleration profiles, but emergency maneuvers might still force crews to flirt with lethal thresholds. Mitigation strategies walk a razor's edge. Anti-G suits can't be too tight or they'll fracture ribs under launch forces. Crew couches mold to distribute pressure, yet still leave astronauts with bruising that lingers for weeks. The most effective defense, lying prone to align the spine with acceleration, turns breathing into a laborious fight against the weight of one's own chest. Every solution is a compromise between survivability and functionality, a reminder that leaving Earth requires submitting to forces that treat human physiology as an afterthought. Perhaps the most chilling realization: these are the G-forces we can predict. Solar storms or orbital debris might necessitate violent last-second maneuvers where crews endure bone-snapping jolts with no warning. Training drills simulate 9 Gs enough to make trainees vomit blood, but space reserves the right to exceed all preparations. The human body is a fragile vessel, and gravity is the indifferent executioner waiting to remind us of that fact with one careless flick of its wrist. A single spark in the wrong place can turn a spacecraft from a technological marvel into a floating coffin, and solar flares love to provide that spark. When a massive coronal mass ejection slammed into Earth in 1859, telegraph operators got the first terrifying preview of space weather's destructive power. Wires burst into flames, equipment shocked users unconscious, and the northern lights blazed so brightly birds began singing at midnight, mistaking the electromagnetic chaos for dawn. Now imagine that same energy surge hitting a modern spaceship's delicate circuitry, where voltage spikes don't just fry a single telegraph, they cascade through life support systems like wildfire through dry brush. The International Space Station has already faced this nightmare. In 2003, a solar storm forced astronauts to shelter in the most shielded module while sparks danced across solar array connections outside. Ground controllers watched helplessly as navigation systems flickered and communication blackouts stretched for hours. That was in low Earth orbit, partially protected by our planet's magnetic field. Venture farther out, say, toward Mars, and the same storm could deliver 10 times the radiation, overwhelming shielding meant for gentler conditions. Engineers designed spacecraft with surge protectors, but as NASA discovered during the Curiosity rover's transit to Mars, some particles punch through anyway. When a cosmic ray struck the rover's onboard computer in 2012, it triggered a catastrophic reboot that left the billion-dollar machine in safe mode for weeks. Human crews wouldn't have that luxury if their oxygen recycler or CO2 scrubbers suddenly went dark. Wiring is just as vulnerable as electronics. The shuttle program learned this brutally in 1991 when Atlantis experienced a mysterious short circuit during launch. Investigation revealed a single stripped wire, smaller than a strand of spaghetti, had been vibrating against metal for years, slowly wearing through its insulation until finally sparking during maximum aerodynamic stress. Modern spacecraft use better shielding, but the laws of physics remain unchanged. Cram 10 million feet of wiring into a confined space, add vibrations from engine burns and micrometeoroid impacts, and eventually something will chafe. Apollo 12 proved even lightning can join the party. The spacecraft got struck twice during liftoff, knocking out power and telemetry until astronauts performed an emergency reset mid-flight. Backup systems offer little comfort when disaster strikes. The ISS has redundant electrical buses, but during a 2015 failure, a cascading tripped 4 of them simultaneously, leaving only one operational. Crews train for dark ship scenarios where they manually reconnect cables by flashlight, but as astronaut Chris Hadfield demonstrated during a simulated exercise, even simple tasks become Herculean when you're floating in 0G while your breathable air dwindles. Mars-bound ships face worse odds with resupply impossible. A total blackout could mean watching CO2 levels climb hour by hour while knowing Earth's help is 8 months away at best. The silent killer isn't the initial failure, it's the domino effect. Lose power to water purifiers and dehydration becomes a threat before starvation. Knock out heating in shadowed regions of the ship and pipes freeze and burst. Worst of all, some damage hides until it's too late. Radiation can flip individual bits in computer memory, a phenomenon called single-event upset, corrupting data without triggering alarms. In 2008, a NASA study found undetected bit flips had caused over 100 unexplained satellite anomalies. Now imagine that glitch hitting the computer controlling your airlock seals during decompression. Engineers battle these threats with radiation-hardened chips and triple-shielded conduits, but space always finds new ways to surprise. The James Webb Space Telescope's designers spent years protecting its systems from solar flares, only to have a micrometeoroid strike unrelated to space weather damage a mirror segment in 2022. For astronauts, every sunrise in orbit could be the prelude to an invisible storm that turns their ship into a drifting crypt. The universe doesn't need monsters to be terrifying sometimes. All it takes is one overloaded circuit in the dark. Lava tubes stretch beneath the Moon and Mars like the veins of some colossal, long-dead beast, dark, winding caverns formed by ancient rivers of molten rock. These tunnels could be humanity's best hope for off-world shelters, their rocky ceilings naturally shielding against radiation and micrometeoroids. But step inside without caution, and those same ceilings might become your tomb. These aren't the sturdy arches of earthly caves. They're fragile relics untouched by erosion, waiting for the slightest disturbance to bring them crashing down. The danger lies in their untested stability. On Earth, lava tubes collapse over millennia, worn down by rain, wind, and seismic activity. The Moon and Mars, however, preserve these tunnels in eerie perfection. No weather to weaken them, no quakes to shake them loose. But that doesn't make them safe. Without internal pressure to hold their shape, their walls could be little more than brittle glass, shattered by the vibrations of a single footstep or the hum of machinery. Apollo astronauts learned this the hard way when their seismic experiments revealed the Moon's subsurface was riddled with voids. some of which buckled under the slightest pressure, swallowing surface equipment without warning. Mars presents an even grimmer puzzle. Its lava tubes are colossal, some wider than subway tunnels and stretching for miles, but their ceilings might be paper-thin in places, disguised by layers of dust. In 2019, researchers simulating Martian conditions at the University of Padova made a chilling discovery. When subjected to the equivalent of a rover's weight, synthetic Mars rock collapsed 30% faster than Earth basalt. The reason: billions of years of dust settling in delicate, unstable layers, creating a house of cards effect. One wrong drill, one overpressurized habitat, and settlers could find themselves buried under tons of razor-sharp regolith. Early cave explorers on Earth faced darkness and tight squeezes. On Mars or the Moon, they'd confront something far worse: no rescue. If a tunnel collapses 50 feet underground, there's no digging out through compacted volcanic rock. No emergency beacons can penetrate that much solid stone. Even communication would fail. Radio signals can't bend through winding subterranean passages. The doomed crew of Thailand's Tham Luang cave in 2018 had at least one advantage: divers could reach them. On another world, you're not just trapped. You're erased. Engineers dream of reinforcing these tubes with inflatable scaffolds or 3D printed supports, but the technology is untested in alien gravity. Lunar gravity, 1/6 of Earth's, might let ceilings hold longer, or it might make them crumble unpredictably like a sandcastle drying in the sun. And Mars' frequent dust storms could load cave roofs with shifting weight, turning a stable refuge into a death trap overnight. The cruel irony: the very thing that makes these tubes so appealing, their isolation from surface dangers, also makes them the hardest places to save anyone when things go wrong. The first lunar colonists might wake each morning to the sound of distant rockfalls echoing through their habitat, a reminder that their home isn't a shelter but a gamble. Every new chamber explored, every wall excavated, risks triggering a collapse that would leave no witnesses, just another silent crater on an already lifeless world. Lava tubes could be the key to surviving space, or they could become our species' first mass graves on another planet. The difference between those two futures hinges on forces we don't yet understand, in a landscape that's already spent billions of years teaching us how fragile we really are. Imagine aiming a rifle at a target 1,000 miles away. Now shrink that target to the size of a coin and fire while riding a merry-go-round. That's the precision required for interplanetary navigation, where a rounding error in a single calculation could mean the difference between landing on Mars and drifting into the void forever. History's littered with near misses that still haunt engineers. In 1962, NASA Mariner 1 probe veered off course just minutes after launch due to a single missing hyphen in its guidance code, a typo that turned a Venus-bound spacecraft into a fireball over the Atlantic. Fast forward to 2016, when the European Space Agency's Schiaparelli lander smashed into Mars at 300 miles per hour because its inertial measurement unit got confused during descent, misjudging altitude by 40 kilometers. These weren't freak accidents, they were previews of how space humbles even the brightest minds. The brutal truth: spacecraft don't follow neat arcs like textbook diagrams. They ride chaotic gravitational currents where every planet's pull becomes a potential slingshot or a trap. Consider NASA's Near Shoemaker probe, which in 1998 missed its first rendezvous with asteroid Eros by 1,500 miles. Why? Engineers had failed to account for pressure from sunlight bouncing off the spacecraft's solar panels. A force so faint it's like a feather brushing against a tank, yet over millions of miles it adds up. Today's missions use ion thrusters to make microscopic course corrections, but the margin for error stays razor-thin. A 1-second overburn during a Mars transfer orbit could displace your arrival point by thousands of kilometers, forcing a choice between burning precious fuel to correct or surrendering to an off-ramp to nowhere. Deep space amplifies every mistake exponentially. Earth's GPS satellites can't help you past the moon, so navigation relies on star trackers and Doppler shifts measured against radio signals that take minutes or hours to travel between planets. The farther you go, the noisier those signals become, drowning in cosmic static. In 2010, Japan's Akatsuki probe aimed for Venus orbit but overshot completely when its engine choked mid-burn. By the time engineers diagnosed the failure, the spacecraft had sailed past its target, requiring 5 years of improvised maneuvers to salvage the mission. Now imagine that scenario with human lives at stake. A crewed ship missing a Mars-breaking burn by seconds, their trajectory now arcing toward the asteroid belt with no hope of rescue. Even successful arrivals hide close calls. Apollo 11's lunar module Eagle overshot its landing zone by 4 miles, Armstrong wrestling the controls as boulder-strewn terrain rushed up at them. Later analysis showed their computer had been overwhelmed by radar data, nearly guiding them into a crater the size of a football stadium. Modern AI improves precision, but space fights back with curveballs like the whiteout effect Martian dust storms create, blinding terrain relative navigation during critical descent phases. Future colonists might rely on orbital beacons, but those can drift or fail, leaving crews to eyeball landings like pioneers navigating by dead reckoning. The cruelest twist, some errors only reveal themselves generations later. NASA Pioneer probes, launched in the 1970s, drifted off predicted paths by hundreds of thousands of miles, not from mechanical failure, but because their radioisotope power sources emitted slightly more heat from one side, creating a photon push weaker than a baby's breath. Over decades, that bias nudged them off course. Similar undiscovered quirks could plague generational ships, where a half-degree variance in course would compound over centuries, stranding descendants light years from their intended haven. Space doesn't forgive, it doesn't compromise, it waits silently for the tiniest oversight, then laughs as Newton's laws turn that mistake into a death sentence written across the stars. Every mission is a high-wire act without a net, where the safety margins are calculated to the 9th decimal place and the 10th decimal might be where doom hides. Gazing down at Earth from orbit should be uplifting, a moment of awe as continents scroll beneath you like living art. But for some astronauts, that very experience becomes a psychological breaking point. They call it the overview effect, but there's a darker side no training manual prepares you for: the crushing realization of humanity's insignificance. Imagine floating above the world, watching storms spiral and cities flicker like embers, and suddenly grasping that wars, empires, and personal struggles are invisible at this scale. Your entire life's meaning evaporates into the blackness. This existential whiplash isn't rare, it's shockingly common. Apollo 14, Edgar Mitchell described returning from the moon spiritually shattered, overwhelmed by the instant global consciousness of Earth's fragility. Others report depressive spirals upon seeing borders vanish, realizing nations are artificial lines drawn on a rock adrift in infinity. The most traumatized aren't the rookies, but the hyper-rational engineers and pilots who built careers on control, only to confront the ultimate truth: we're microbes clinging to a speck. Russian cosmonauts coined a term for it: space sadness, a melancholy so profound some refuse to look out windows during missions. The aftermath back on Earth can be worse. Adjusting to petty human concerns after seeing the cosmic big picture triggers alienation. NASA psychologists track a pattern. Astronauts who have experienced deep space struggle with mundane conversations, rage at political squabbles, or develop obsessive environmental activism. One unnamed shuttle veteran quit the program to live in isolation, telling counselors, "After seeing the whole, I can't pretend the pieces matter." Even positive transformations carry trauma. When your worldview fractures, the reassembly leaves scars. The overview effect doesn't just change how you see Earth, it changes whether you can bear to look at it at all. From the silent killer of cosmic radiation to the suffocating grip of Martian dust storms, we've journeyed through the 30 most terrifying hazards of space exploration, each one a reminder that the universe is as beautiful as it is brutal. Imagine floating in the void, surrounded by invisible particles shredding your DNA, or watching helplessly as a solar flare fries your ship's electronics mid-voyage. Picture the psychological torment of isolation, where time blurs and even the sound of a crewmate's breath becomes unbearable, or the chilling reality of a single micrometeoroid strike ripping through your spacesuit before you can gasp for air. These aren't just hypotheticals, they're the price of venturing beyond our fragile blue dot. Yet here's the paradox: for every danger, there's a story of human ingenuity rising to meet it. When Apollo 13's oxygen tank exploded, astronauts turned their lunar module into a lifeboat. When the Mir space station caught fire, crews fought back with wet towels and sheer grit. Even now, engineers are designing magnetic shields to deflect radiation, AI systems to predict solar storms, and self-healing materials to patch hull breaches autonomously. The same curiosity that drives us into the cosmos also fuels our refusal to surrender to its threats. So as you watch these eerie scenes, the swirling dust of Mars, the silent dance of debris in Earth's orbit, the sun's furious flares, remember, space doesn't give warnings. But it also doesn't extinguish our resolve. Every mission, every failure, every near disaster teaches us how to survive a little longer, push a little farther. The dangers are real, but so is our determination to outsmart them. Now it's your turn. Which of these 30 hazards shocked you the most? Was it the way zero gravity warps the body, or the nightmare of a hull breach in vacuum? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's keep the conversation soaring, because the future of space exploration isn't just about rockets and equations. It's about all of us staring into the abyss and deciding to reach further anyway. The risks are vast, but so is our courage, and that's what makes the journey worth taking.